number 1 Alexander Pope, and number 2 satire, and number 3 this, number 4 and number 5. Now it will be quite clear to you. There are 5 points or 5 sections of this session that you would keep yourself with me, and some of the things that you know already about these topics, about these 5 topics. Let's start and let's move to the next slide. They're the same pattern that we have discussed already. So this is outline slide, there is introduction and satire and mock epic and textual study and analysis of the rape of the lock. So it's divided into 4 sections. Now a very short introduction to Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope, who was born on 21st May 1688 and died on 30th May 1744. So what becomes his age? Yes, got it right, 66 almost. Is regarded as one of the greatest English poets, you know it already, and the foremost poet of the early 18th century. This is important thing about Alexander Pope, one of the foremost poets of 18th century with Dryden. So his name would be parallel to Dryden. He is best known for his satirical and discursive poetry, including the Rape of the Lock. It's kind of discursive and satirical poetry. Both things are mixed in the Rape of the Lock. The Dunciad and an essay on criticism. You must remember it as far as your PPSC exams are concerned, or some other exams of educators are concerned, that what are the important writings of Alexander Pope. Then you may say it easily that number 1 work, that is the Rape of the Lock. Number 2, you must remember this, his prose work and essay on criticism, and number 3, that's the Dunciad. So these are important works, pieces of work of Alexander Pope that you must remember for your future programs. And if someone asks that who was Alexander Pope and what are his important writings, then this slide would be enough for the answer. As well as for the translation of Homer, his early work, that translation of Homer, because he was such a pedantic person, he knew everything, because he studied too much for the reason that he used to keep himself alone at his home, even to his own, stuck to the one room only. And if someone comes to meet him, to see him, then sometimes he is very cynical. He becomes very cynical. He was a very kind of cynical and lonely kind of person who is not comfortable in sociability, or there are so many people around, there are so many people, he won't like that situation. So he liked solitude because of so many reasons. And the number 1 reason was that he was some kind of paralyzed or deformed kind of person of not more than 4 feet or some inches, so very short heighted and a deformed kind of personality. So people didn't like him in his childhood. His chummies didn't like him in his childhood, so it was why that his reaction to society was quite dangerous, and that was cynical kind of reaction that he adopted throughout his life for society. So he was a reactionary poet, reactionary to the society values or social taboos, or to some relatives or even friends he was cynical about. So it was why that he was so pedantic. He studied too much, keeping himself to one room and just studying and studying. And we see here touch that Homer was here to be studied for him. Greek to English translation, we see the translation of Homer, and that was one of the most difficult tasks of all times, to translate one language into other, and that of Homer, that one of the greatest classical blind poet of Greece. So here and there we find touches of these things that he was interested in. It was a short biography of Alexander Pope. I think now you are ready for the next slide. Are you ready? Okay then. Satire in 18th century. Let's talk about a bit about the satire in 18th century. Let me not define satire. What is satire? You know it already in Introduction to Literature. What is satire? Basic terms that you might have studied already. The 18th century was one in which exaltation of wit and reason came to the forefront of literature. For the very first time in English literature, it happened that wit and reason, that rationality, rational things, the logical things came on the forefront in English literature, and we find that too much in that literature of this era. It is why that we call it neoclassical era, that the old things came to existence or re-existence again, that revived again through Dryden and through Alexander Pope. They brought to the surface Homer and other great poets of the past. So it is called neoclassical era because classical poets were highlighted in this era again. So which though keen observation was there, and the sharp nimbleness of thought, keenness of thought and minuteness of thought was also there. Exposed the superficial follies, flaws and shortcomings, and mistakes and errors that were quite superficial acts and moral corruption of society during the neoclassical period in Britain. So what happened during that period that these things came into action? What were the things that were brought to light? Number one, superficial follies, number one. Moral corruption, that is number two. And neoclassical period, that was, I have already discussed this term, neoclassical period. So these two things were brought to light in that period, in that era of neoclassical times. So I hope that the things are quite clear to you. Now let's start the next thing. Underneath the Enlightenment ideals of rationality, as we have talked earlier, that it was a rational period, order and knowledge, society embraced a pervasive obsession with decorum. If you have studied Victorian era, the same touches were there in the 18th century as well. What were the things that were prevalent? That society embraced a pervasive obsession, that the minds were full of decorum, that there should be decorum of things. A facade, you can pronounce it facade, that's good enough, but you can also pronounce it facade. Both are correct pronunciations, means front, the things that are in front of you. A facade of established traditions and vanities, and we see that there are established traditions and vanities were there, useless things and artificial things were coming to the surface in that time, as well as an innate sense of moral and political supremacy, and people were gaining the importance of moral and political supremacy, that they should be important at the time of Pope, that political supremacy should be fought for. We should fight for political supremacy as well in the name of moral supremacy. If we would propagate morality, then people would vote us, would cast vote on our side, and we will gain political supremacy, and that was the thing that were prevalent at that time. So hopefully you are clear about this slide. What we have discussed, that the literature brought to the surface superficial follies and moral corruption of society of that time, and people were rational at that time, and their minds were full of political and moral supremacy to gain over the other party. Let's move to the next one. Satires during this period aimed to point out the shortcomings of society through ridiculing accepted standards of thought. So what was the aim of satires of that time? That the satires ridiculed accepted standards of thought, that people have accepted some kind of thoughts, and those thoughts were standard of the time, that people were habitual of acting upon those thoughts, that I should act upon this thought because this is traditional and I have accepted this standard. But the satire of that kind of that time ridiculed these standards of thought because they were faulty, because they were not good enough. As we have standards of thought today, but they are really faulty and really mistaken, but we don't focus on them because we are so orthodox and traditional and we don't want changes. number one. And number two, what did the satire do of that time? Exposing Britain's flaws and chastising and the hypocrisy of the time. So they were chastising the hypocrisy of the time, that the time was very hypocrite, that they were saying something else and doing something else. So they highlighted those flaws. So you see that two things were ridiculed at that time of Pope. Enlightenment writers Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift use different mediums of satire, different types of logic, and different targets of ridicule in order to shine a light to separate aspects of British society. So there is a comparison with Jonathan Swift here, providing much needed criticism of the profuse moral corruption of a society that sometimes seemed to forget the true ideals of its age. So they were not following the true ideals of his age, and two great satirists were on the surface at that moment, and the names are written here. Alexander Pope, number one of the greatest satirists of all times. So this number one, the number one Alexander Pope, and number two, that is Jonathan Swift. So the great writers of the time, great satirists that you must remember. Okay, clear? Let's move to the next one. What is mock epic? That's the third section, you may say, or that's 2.5th section. Mock epic, also called mock heroic epic or mock heroic jest. Form of satire. It is a form of satire that adapts the elevated heroic style of classical epic poem that's important about it to a trivial subject, and that is important, as I have said. Trivial subject, that the subject, its subject matter, its material is quite trivial, that is on a small scale, tiny scale, because the subject matter is dealt here in mock epic, that is about hero and heroine, and those hero and heroine are quite small kinds of petty kinds of human beings. They are not great human beings like the subject and the characters of Paradise Lost. You know that heroic poem or epic poem, that is Paradise Lost. The subject is great, characters are great, and everything that has been dealt there is great. But here we see that style is the same as that of epic, but the characters and the themes are trivial in mock epic. So that's the contrast and the main thing about mock epic, that it follows the style of an epic poem, but the characters and the themes are quite trivial. That's on smaller scale. So that is mock epic. I hope that you are clear about mock epic and the difference between epic and mock epic. That's the text, and 2 slides are devoted to the text of this mock epic, Rape of the Lock. Close by those meads, by those meadows, there are meadows, and close to those meadows, forever crowned with flowers, there are flowers, and the land was crowned with those flowers, where Thames river was present, with pride surveys his rising towers, and there are rising towers as well. So that's the scene. Now you have understood that this is the setting of the poem or the scene, that there are meadows, there are flowers, and there are towers, great buildings, and the river Thames. That's beautiful sight. What a beautiful sight it must be. There stands a structure of majestic frame, and there in that scene there is a structure, there is a building that of majestic frame, and its structure was great, majestic. It means that the Lord, the Majesty, would come here to be entertained. So that's the kind of court. What is that court? Hampton Court, which from the neighboring Hampton takes its name. It means that is Hampton Court because Hampton is nearby the area. Here, what happens here in this court, at this palace, Hampton Palace? What happens here? Britain statements of the fall freedom, foredom. Here they come, great statement, great leaders, great politicians come here and foredoom, and they predict of foreign tyrants and of nymphs at home. So here we see a trivial subject. Here you can see that they talk about foreign tyrants, foreign invaders, foreign knights, that they might attack us, our land, because the leaders are talking to each other. They talk about foreign affairs here in this Hampton Palace. And what they talk about? And of nymphs at home. They talk about the girls who are staying at home. So that's a trivial subject, and that's the reality of the time as well. What they were talking about? They were talking about the girls at home, beautiful girls at home who are staying at home. These leaders are talking about the girls and affairs as well. So that's a strange thing, and that's important about mock epic. Now you have come to understand what is mock epic, and that's real as well. That's not unreal or imaginative thing as well. So we see that they are talking about nymphs, beautiful girls. Hear thou great Anna, great queen of that time, who three realms obey, because there was Ireland in British company of that time as well, and you know that Britain was a great state of that time. It is also known as Great Britain because of that, and Scotland and Ireland were there as well, and England itself. So does sometimes counsel take? You come here for some consultation, for some advice from your ministers, and sometimes tay. So here it is pronounced as tay, not t, because it's couplet and it is rhymed with obey. Tay, freedom, home, frame, name, flowers, stars. So we see, so you would pronounce it T, not T. Here in the times of Pope, it was pronounced as just like this. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Hither the heroes and the nymphs resort. Here the heroes, great heroes also come. Here the great heroes and the nymphs, the beautiful heroines also come to taste a while the pleasures of a court, to know about the pleasures of the court in various talk, the instructive hours they passed, and they passed very instructive good hours there. Who gave the ball? For example, what is important about it? What is the importance of this instructive hours, instructive time? Number one, they talk about who gave the ball, number one. And what they talk about, you know about the ball dance party. So they talk about the dance party, who gave it, and or paid the visit last, and who paid money for the last visit. So they talk about these things. Are the important things. Who paid the last visit, who paid money for the last ball, for the last dance party. One speaks, and one person at the table, if there are three persons speaking among each other, among themselves. So one speaks the glory of the British Queen, one of them speaks about the British Queen, and one describes a charming Indian queen, and the other person would be speaking about the imported things, because screens and blinds were imported from India. So they talk about imported things, and the third interprets, and the third person would interpret, would understand, and would discuss the motions, looks and eyes, that a girl is appearing at the moment through the doors, and he would talk about the motions, about her motions, about her gait, that how she walks, how she looks, and he would be talking about her looks and about her eyes. So that was the discussion that was in session, or that used to be happened there in the court, and these are important matters that he is mocking, that Alexander Pope is mocking at. These are the occasions. So one is discussing Queen, and the second Indian charming screen, imported things, and the third one is looking at the girl, and he would interpret in different ways that this motion means, this movement means this, and if she has looked on me it means this, and she has looked on me in this manner, so it means this. So the different interpretation of a girl's movements, as you know pretty well. At every word a reputation dies, and when he is talking about that beautiful girl, at every word her reputation dies, her honor has been killed. So that's honor killing in another way. So they are talking in that manner. So see the rhythm of Pope's lines. A third interprets motion, looks, and eyes. At every word, a reputation dies. Snuff. So they are taking powdered snuff, powdered tobacco, or the fan. So when they stop talking about these matters, then they take snuff, or they use fan. Supply each pause of chat, if there is some pause during the chat, during their gupshup, with singing, or they sing, laughing, ogling, and all that, or they used to laugh during the pauses of their conversation, or they ogle. Ogle means to see girls, with your corners of eyes, means with some kind of shyness you see a girl that she won't know that you are seeing at her. So that is kind of ogling. There's colloquial language, informal one, that you look through the corners of your eyes at the girls, at the beautiful girls rather, I can say. So these are the things, and now you understand what this mock epic is about. So it discusses these petty matters. This epic or mock epic poem discusses the subjects like these. I hope the point is clear. Let's talk about the last slide. The boat arrives at Hampton Court Palace, and now our next scene. And the ladies and gentlemen disembark to their courtly amusements. After a pleasant round of chatting and gossip, Belinda sits down with two of the men to game of cards. They play Umber, a game, a 300 game of tricks and trumps, somewhat like bridge. So that's a game like bridge. Bridge is a very important card game, and it is described in terms of heroic battle. And this is discussed as a battle is going to be conducted or to happen. The cards are troops combating on the velvet plain. These cards have been thrown on velvet plain on the card table. Belinda, who is the heroine of the poem, under the watchful care of sylphs, begins favorably. So there is divine machinery as well, and one of them is sylphs like an angel. She favors Belinda, heroine. She declares spades as trumps and leads with her highest cards, sure of success. Soon, however, the hand takes a turn for the worse when to Baron, the hero of the poem. Fate inclines the field. He catches her king of clubs with his queen and then leads back with his high diamonds. Belinda is in danger of being beaten, but recovers in the last trick so as to just barely win back the amount of she bid. So the times is over. It is why that I have read it so immediately or so quickly. So you would be reading by yourself. This to sum up, I can say that it is a game of Umber, and they are playing, and Belinda is scary about losing the game because she has never lost the game, and now the table is in between them, and they are starting a game at this Hampton Court. Hampton Court, you know quite well that what happens there. So that's all about mock epic, and all about satire of 18th century, and all about some autobiographical elements of Pope. Court Palace, and now our next scene. And the ladies and gentlemen disembark to their courtly amusements. After a pleasant round of chatting and gossip, Belinda sits down with two of the men to game of cards. They play Umber, a game, a 300 game of tricks and trumps, somewhat like bridge. So that's a game like bridge. Bridge is a very important card game, and it is described in terms of heroic battle. And this is discussed as a battle is going to be conducted or to happen. The cards are troops combating on the velvet plain. These cards have been thrown on velvet plain on the card table. Belinda, who is the heroine of the poem, under the watchful care of sylphs, begins favorably. So there is divine machinery as well, and one of them is sylphs like an angel. She favors Belinda, heroine. She declares spades as trumps and leads with her highest cards, sure of success. Soon, however, the hand takes a turn for the worse when to Baron, the hero of the poem. Fate inclines the field. He catches her king of clubs with his queen and then leads back with his high diamonds. Belinda is in danger of being beaten, but recovers in the last trick so as to just barely win back the amount of she bid. So the times is over. It is why that I have read it so immediately or so quickly. So you would be reading by yourself. This to sum up, I can say that it is a game of Umber and they are playing, and Belinda is scary about losing the game because she has never lost the game, and now the table is in between them, and they are starting a game at this Hampton Court. Hampton Court, you know quite well that what happens there. So that's all about mock epic and all about satire of 18th century and all about some autobiographical elements of Pope.